In a previous presentation, Richard, you told us the difference between the Roman Catholic Church and the Liberal Catholic Church. And now I'm wondering if you could tell us about the difference between the Anglican Church and the Liberal Catholic Church.
Well, the differences are not quite so clear, perhaps, or not quite so sharp. The founding bishops, one of our founding bishops, was closely associated with the Anglican Church. So there's some flavour of the Anglican Church that comes through the Liberal Catholic Church. And the liturgy that was formulated by our founding bishops, a lot of liturgies were considered altogether in parallel. Roman Catholic liturgy, Anglican liturgy, or all the liturgies that were available, very old liturgies. And so the Anglican, the flavour, if you like, of the Anglican Church is very much in the Church. Now, the differences between the Liberal Catholic Church and the Anglican Church are less obvious. And it's more along the lines of the way that the Anglican Church has changed through the years. So sometimes there are strong opinions at particular parishes, or where the bishop runs his diocese, and there may be very, very strong opinions on the role of the laity and the role of the clergy. So this is, I guess, most obviously seen where you see there are female priests and female bishops in the Anglican Church. So there's one obvious difference between the Liberal Catholic Church and the Anglican Church. We don't have female deacons, priests, bishops, archbishops at all in our church. We have a different tradition to deal with that. So that's probably the most obvious difference between the Liberal Catholic Church and the Anglican Church. The other differences may just come through individual Anglican priests that you might bump into, where they may again be somewhat of the opinion that God is out there somewhere and you've got to approach God sort of in that outdoor sense, approaching from somewhere in the wilderness to come into another place. And we have quite a different opinion about that in the Liberal Catholic Church. The Christ resides within us from the moment we're born, and we have sacraments to reinforce and encourage that connection. And so that's a little bit of a difference, but that is probably more obvious from one church to another rather than necessarily Anglican doctrine.
Oh, right. Well, that was going to be my next question, actually, that we say here in the Liberal Catholic Church that Christ is born in us. And I wondered if the Anglican Church did believe that too.
It's not such a clear demarcation, I think. It may come through the interpretation of individual priests with the words that they're using. And perhaps if you had conversations with 5 Anglican priests, you might get slightly different interpretations of that. So I think it's less obviously different, if I can say it like that.
Oh, good, thank you. My last question is about Mary. I wonder why other churches don't honour Mary the way the Liberal Catholic Church does, because she seems to be such an important part of the whole story.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Mary is an extremely important part of the whole story. I think, again, you'd have to go back a little bit in history and look at what are the traditions of, if you might like to call, the non-Catholic traditions. When the movement of protest started, the Protestant Revolution started, there was different aspects of that, but it was a reaction that the movement, the generation of protests against the Roman Catholic Church was because of the excesses of the Roman Catholic Church. And this occurred at different times, much earlier, hundreds of years ago. And particularly the way that the Church, the Roman Catholic Church, gave out instruments, they call them, called indulgences. So this was part of the dogma, if you like, the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, where when you die, you go into 3 different places. One of them is just sort of halfway house, and in order to get out of halfway house and proceed to the next, ideally heaven, you need to have people saying prayers for you. And the Roman Catholic Church decided, unwisely, that they would sell an indulgence. That is, for money, you could get a guarantee that your relative, whatever, who had recently died and was in purgatory or in halfway house, then they would go to heaven. And so this basically generated the protest from Luther. Starting from that, all different flavours of protest came out. So in the English tradition, we see Quakers who follow a tradition called quietness or quietists. It's just a religious word. And it means they remain quiet most of the time and speak when they're moved deep from their hearts. It's a very powerful tradition. And Quakers, you may know a number of famous Quakers in history, extremely courageous and great changes of society. Then, in England, during Henry VIII's reign, Henry VIII had a balance of payments problem, and somebody whispered in his ear and said there's an awful lot of gold to be found in the Roman Catholic churches that was, as we might call, repurposed. So in the process of repurposing all these things, the church statues and paintings were ripped out of the church, and with them a lot of the connection with Mary. In Europe, if you travel to Europe, it's not like that at all. There's a very strong connection in the Catholic tradition in Europe with Mary. We've been in Europe a number of times where there's festivals where the whole village celebrates the Mary connection in their lives and in their work and everything about it. So the disconnection from Mary is more along the lines of different aspects of the Protestant movement.
Well, I still don't understand really why the other churches, Protestant churches, why don't they honour Mary?
I think they just don't emphasise her. I think it's more a question of emphasising, not in the same way that we try to bring Mary into the picture, and so it's a complete picture in the liberal Catholic Church. I think they just don't emphasise it the same way as we do it. I don't think they completely neglect it. It's just probably not so obvious.
No, it's not very obvious at all.
No, that's right. And it'll vary from church to church.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's helped a lot.
It's my pleasure, and please, we'll have another chat soon.